Welcome to Alberta Conservation Association's Harvest Your Own podcast, the resource for everything hunting, navigating through the field, the butcher shop, and the kitchen. Life is all about great food. Let's get started.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Brad Fenson, an avid outdoor enthusiast who has worked as a freelance journalist, photographer, and public speaker for over 3 decades. I have hunted, fished, and foraged all my life and hope to share my passion for the outdoors. Along the way, I want to encourage everyone to harvest wild proteins and enjoy the satisfaction of providing the next meal for your family. Our goal is to educate, entertain, and inspire individuals to get outdoors and create a connection between food, health, and your future meals. Welcome to Harvest Your Own. I'd like to introduce a friend of mine, Mark DesRoches, a veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces. I would have to describe him as a waterfowl fanatic, outdoor enthusiast. I think you do a little bit of fishing too?
A little bit, Brad, but if it doesn't have feathers, I'm usually not that involved with it.
Yeah, you're probably the most gung-ho waterfowler I know. You don't hunt deer or other things. You will take on the odd pheasant or upland game bird, but feathers are your thing.
Yeah, originally from Prince Edward Island, so we didn't have any big game. So big game for me was Canada geese, and it's just stuck in my blood ever since.
Tell us a little bit about Mark so the listeners understand and know you a little bit better.
Okay, well, as I mentioned, born in PEI, 50 plus years ago, we'll put it that way. Grew up as a duck hunter. My dad took me duck hunting probably the first time when I was 8 or 9, and just amazing to see the marsh wake up and that. And I was kind of half hooked then. And then met a friend of Dad's who had a pretty extensive taxidermy collection back then, and I was in awe of it, and I'd always thought that someday, if only. Took me a while to finally connect with a bird way back when, but lo and behold, the first bird I ever shot was a mature drake-hooded merganser.
Oh, wow.
I actually still have that bird mounted at home, and pretty rare in the time in PEI to get one. So the seed was set then, and for the last 40 plus years, I've been chasing waterfowl all over this continent.
Literally. The North American Waterfowl Slam, in case some people haven't heard of it, was 41 birds, but is now, it was 41, then 42, and now it's back to 41?
Yeah, it's at 41 right now. They haven't, the Mexican duck has just been given its own species. It was originally thought as a model duck, but the Mexican mallard or the Mexican duck is there. Hasn't been added to the 41 yet. And then, of course, the emperor goose hasn't been added either, although I was lucky enough to harvest one last year, probably the first Canadian in 35 years to legally harvest one. But because it's such a difficult tag to get only 25 non-residents, I don't believe it'll be added to the slam. So, and there's lots of subspecies within that. So the slam is 41, but I'm well beyond that, with hybrids and subspecies and things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting once you, get hooked on waterfowl. It's not one game. It's so many different games, right? Like you hunt divers and you hunt early season and late, and geese and specks are different than snows, and there's a lot to learn.
Yeah, it can be overwhelming, but it's not. Just decide what you want to do. Look a little bit into that. Really, duck hunting in the prairies especially is not that gear intensive. You can pretty well get a few decoys and a pair of rubber boots and go down to a local pothole and have a bit of fun. On the other side of the range, you can have a huge rig of decoys for a snow goose, which is a major gear requirement. Not as bad as in Canada as it is down south at times. And it's the variance from sitting in a small little pothole somewhere in central Saskatchewan to floating in a layout boat in Prince William Sound waiting for a harlequin to come by. That's the variance that you can get in duck hunting.
Yeah, the first thing you said about you don't need anything specialized. I think in Western Canada we're spoiled, and you know this coming from Eastern Canada. We're blessed with just a ridiculous number of birds and diversity.
The plethora of opportunity here in the prairies is world renowned. It's can't be surpassed anywhere else. So I've hunted, like I mentioned, from top to bottom and left to right of the continent. I've retired now from the military and stayed in Alberta, and I also have a place in Saskatchewan, as you're aware.
Right.
I think the ducks and the waterfowl kept me here as much as anything else.
Yeah, your career brought you here, and the birds made you stay.
That's about right.
They kept you from migrating.
That's correct. I didn't migrate back east.
That's right. The main reason I brought you in today is to talk about cranes. Sandhill Cranes, Alberta was blessed with their very first ever season in 2020. And I know lots of hunters did get out and experience things and harvested some birds. And I saw lots of posts on social media. People were raving about not only the opportunity, but how the birds looked and how exciting it was. And then on the table, it was like the crescendo.
Yeah, definitely a great opportunity in Alberta here this year to be able to partake in hunting cranes. They are, without a doubt, the ribeye of the sky. Of all the birds we eat, without a doubt, hands down, they are my favorite. Lots of other birds will be made into sausage, jerky, or given away to friends. Crane has a hard time making it out of my freezer unless it's going on into my plate.
That's right. Just special occasions.
Yeah.
Which includes your own meals. You know, it's funny, December 2019, Environment Canada was the one that proposed an Alberta Sandhill crane season. And it was the fourth time that Alberta was lined up to get a new opportunity for some type of waterfowl, which was Sandhill crane. And luckily, this time we brought it to fruition. We actually made it happen. A lot of people might not know the history, but there's a lot of different organizations that have pushed hard for that season. And our government and our minister really pushed hard for it this time. And although there was opposition, we have it. And I think it's important to talk numbers a little bit. Cranes are hunted across North America. And the way the allocation is split, 50% of the harvest can be in U.S. states and 50% in Canada. So we've got provinces like Saskatchewan and Manitoba that have had a season for years, although their harvest isn't very high. There's a lot of, as you know, you meet some locals in Saskatchewan, they're like, wow, why do you guys want to go shoot those lawn darts or this or that? What do you do with them? They've had it for over 50 years, but no one's ever, dove in and learned to appreciate the bird for its hunting and for its eating.
It has absolutely been probably the redheaded stepchild of the waterfowl world.
That's a good way to put
it. And it does have a red head as well. So
right.
Maybe that moniker is fitting. I really think the cranes are they're on the cutting edge of taking off to be appreciated for just what they are. Anybody that I've taken crane hunting, after that first long legs drops down and those wings glide in, and that a very unique call. It sounds like he's right on top of you when he's miles away, and then when they finally see those birds set and glide in, and it all comes together. I've seen grown waterfowlers, experienced waterfowlers that get buck fever and literally
start shaking,
are just shaking and can't even they don't believe it. So. Cranes are on the cutting edge of coming to become mainstream, I believe, right now. And as you can see, there's a lot of the hunting community that's picking up the crane mantra and moving forward very quickly.
Yeah, I just want to mention we are very lucky to have a season and a 5-bird limit, 15 in possession. If you lived in a place like Utah, you could apply for a draw. You might get drawn every second or third or fourth year, and you're allowed 1 bird. So it is a unique opportunity, and there's lots of people that would love to pursue them, but just don't have seasons or opportunity.
Yeah, it's a very narrow band, actually, in the Central Flyway where we can hunt cranes, and Alberta was the only addition in quite some time, which was really a positive thing because in today's environment, on the hunting community and the fishing community, it's very difficult to gain anything right now. Usually we lose our opportunities. We've gained an opportunity. We need to celebrate that.
It's interesting. I think it's important to share some of the numbers. Management objectives for cranes in North America was 349,000 birds to 472,000, and I got this from Environment Canada. They do transects along the Platte River in Nebraska, where a lot of the birds stage, and they're actually protected. There's no season there, and from what I understand, there probably never will be because they are such a draw for people just to come and watch. But the last average that came out of there's 660,000 birds. That's way above the mid-continent population objective or plan. The birds are doing just fine, even though there's more hunting right across North America. And it's part of that old mantra about you want to protect a bird, hunt it, because hunters care for them. They put their dollars behind it, and they'll make sure that they're taken care of.
Absolutely. If you've looked, and it's been a very unfortunate study when they showed the bird population since the 70s, and songbirds and all those other types of birds have taken drastic drops. The only two, let's call them groups of birds that are advancing is waterfowl and upland game birds. So it shows that hunters are conservationists and they care about it, and we actually have more of those birds than we've had in the 70s. So
yeah. Well, it's interesting because the crane population is over 30% above the long-term average or above the long-term plan of what they would like to have the population at. And adding Alberta to the season will increase the harvest by less than 5%. And I strongly believe that because for starters, a lot of people haven't got into it, don't know much about the bird, and they're just opportunists. But, cranes are very habitual in terms of how they do things every year. The adult birds they're quite unique because they're sort of honed in on specific areas, and when they migrate, they stop, and they do it every year. That's where they stop, then they bounce. And Alberta's probably better considered one of the bounce provinces rather than a large staging. We do get some bird staging in the southeast and on the eastern edges, but a lot of them come in, they spend a couple days, and they're almost like Arctic geese. They head out before they actually want to sit down and fatten up a bit. Yeah,
they have very distinguished or defined, let's call them stop zones or stop areas. And you're absolutely right. Only on the eastern side, basically the Saskatchewan-Alberta border, is where you're going to find any amount of them that have some stop areas that are either in Alberta or just on the border. There's a few there as you work your way down, but the birds are actually cutting across Alberta on from a west to the east transect. They're not going north-south. They're on an east-west transect more than anything else, and hence they kind of all meet together just south of Hardisty. And it's kind of funny, actually, if you look, the western edge of a crane flyway is the Keystone XL pipeline, because they actually all meet in Nebraska, right near the Platte River. So,
isn't that interesting?
Yeah, if you actually look, that's kind of a little kind of a neat fact that from Alberta can see. So that's your line where they're really thick. And then there's still, obviously, like you mentioned, a bounce problem. Still lots of birds in southern Alberta as well. It doesn't mean that they're not there. It's just the flyway itself is kind of neat where it runs down.
I'd like to add that that's where the birds tend to stage in the huntable areas of Alberta. Our seasons only run from the central parkland through the southeast. There's none in the west and there's none in the Peace Country, but there are lots of staging birds in the Peace Country. You didn't hear about it lots, but this year, because the season opened up and it didn't open there, people are like, man, we got thousands of cranes, and how come we don't have a season? So maybe we can work on that for the future, but at least we've got something implemented. And, we tried to get hunters ready for this. And if you're familiar with Harvest Your Own, there's a bunch of information on there on cranes, and we hope to add some more.
This podcast is produced for Harvest Your Own, a program dedicated to those who want to reconnect with food and health through their experiences outdoors. HarvestYourOwn.ca is a resource for individuals to learn more about hunting and the outdoors. There's information to get you started and ensure that your compass stays pointed in the right direction to be successful. Where's your next meal coming from?
Well, if I had a choice, my next meal would probably be coming from your freezer. I think garlic ginger crane or teriyaki or something like that. Some of the meals that we enjoyed this fall, actually.
Yeah, I've cooked it a lot. I tell my friends to cook it a lot like a beef.
Right.
It's much more of a beef-like meal than it is a fowl-type meal.
Texture and flavor.
Yeah. It's more of a red meat, actually, when you put it down on the table and you look at it. I have crane steaks. We actually barbecue like a steak. Just make sure it's medium rare, folks. Don't overcook it because there's no fat in it. Pull crane has become a super popular thing, especially when we have people over, not during COVID times right now, but in the past when you had folks over, nothing like having, instead of having pulled pork, having pulled crane, and then stir fries and all those other things that we've done with it. I haven't actually baked the crane, but I'm not a big fan of baked duck or goose either, but I'm sure that it would be fine as long as you didn't dry it out.
Yeah, I cooked some legs and thighs this year from the birds that we harvested, and the stuffed thighs that I did were tremendous. They were very good.
Yeah, I noticed when you did those with the legs and that, and especially the thigh meat. There's a lot of thigh meat on a crane.
Yeah, they do a lot of walking and strutting, so their thighs are pretty big. It's a pretty big piece of meat. Life history of the cranes are pretty interesting.
Yeah, they are. Believe it or not, the average age of a crane is about 20 years.
Yeah, that's hard to believe.
Yeah, they are a very long-lived bird. They've actually had some banding reports of birds that are in excess of 35 years old.
Wow, that's impressive.
So they've got a lot of miles on them, and they fly up and down the flyway lots. They generally have 1 to 2 chicks a year. Most often, only one of those chicks will survive. the stronger of the two. It's just Mother Nature's way of doing it. On a good year with lots of food, they'll both survive. They stay with their parents down through the migration. And when the parents are getting ready to come back up, they kind of say that's enough with the young ones. Although we have found that some of the late flocks that come down will have proportionally more young ones than old ones in them.
Interesting.
Not sure if it's just because we're getting higher Arctic birds and some of them leave later or not, but the later we hunt them, the more we seem to get the juveniles.
Right. Now, you say Arctic birds. Like, these birds nest way up north.
Yeah, we've got birds. They start in Alberta, actually.
Right.
Northern Alberta has cranes. Unfortunately, close to Wood Buffalo Park, where the whoopers are, which is kind of why we don't have all of Alberta open at once.
Right.
But they come as far as Russia. They cross the Bering Sea. They're, just like we have our snow geese over in Wrangell Island, we actually have cranes that come as far as Russia over. And then all of Alaska and northern Canada is crane nesting area.
Yeah, and it's hard to understand that, but I did a moose hunt once in the Yukon, and I spent my time on a remote lake. And every single day for 7 days, there was a line of cranes going over the lake that never ended. It was just like music that serenaded you for an entire week. Thousands and thousands and thousands. And I also did a trip up there one time. We were jet boating on the river, and there was a big sandbar in front of our camp. And at night, the cranes would come in by the tens of thousands. They'd all land on the sandbar, and then in the morning they'd get up and go. But they're coming a long ways. We see them in Alberta. You talk about that west to east transition and migration, and that's what we see at home here in the Edmonton area. Those cranes are all flying east, and it's like, what's going on? But you know, they have their transects that they fly. They come out of the north into Alberta. They head east, southeastern Alberta, Saskatchewan. I don't even know do they go as far east as Manitoba, or are those different birds?
Those are different birds, actually. Like I mentioned, they're all funneling down into the Platte River. And it's quite a show there. In the spring, it's worth going to see. At any point in time in the spring when the migration's on, there'll be 250,000 cranes sitting in the Platte River basin. It's quite a sight to see. And what's different in the fall is they go through there again, but they don't stop. There's not quite the festival in the fall. They're on the move. But in the spring, they stop and spend quite a bit of time there because there's a lot of agriculture in that area as they get themselves fattened up to go north.
Yes, and they certainly do fatten up in the grain fields. I mean, the ones that we shot were in tremendous shape.
Yeah, they are an omnivore, and they'll pick and choose. They'll eat bugs, rats, mice, all that kind of stuff. Frogs, you name it. They're fish. Yeah, but their primary food source, and especially in the prairie provinces, and when they're coming through here, is barley and barley fields for the most part. There is a little bit of them at the odd time in the corn where we're at in our area. We don't have much corn, but they do get some guys and get them in the corn as well. But they eat like a goose in the fall. That's
interesting. So let's get right into the meat and potatoes of it. You want to hunt cranes. How do you get started? What do you need?
What do you need? A good set of binoculars and a vehicle right off the bat. Watch the birds. The birds are going to tell you where they go. They are birds of as you mentioned, they do a lot of the things over and over again. So find an area that they're roosting in. Cranes go into roost. They generally go into roost right before dark. One of the things about them to watch is they can be flying very low, nape to the earth. If they don't have to get up high, they don't. When they migrate, they're up there riding the thermal currents. Right. But when they're moving back and forth from point A to roost or from roost to field, they're not a high-flying bird. They don't get way up there in the sky. If they're up in the sky, they're moving somewhere else. Listen for them.
That's a big thing.
They will give away. Their voice is so loud, they can give away. As you know, when we were looking for them in a snowstorm, we couldn't see them, but I could hear them. And listen and watch. And then when you find them where they're going to sleep, number one thing is to find where they sleep, and then because they're not a long flyer in the morning. They generally aren't going to go much more than 3 or 4 miles, sometimes a little more, but generally not, to their feed source. Watch them in the morning, and when I hunt cranes, they have to be in the field at least twice that I've seen them before I go.
That's good advice.
Yeah. Just because you find them on Monday morning, don't hunt them Monday afternoon. They might come back. They might not. They're more like a snow goose when it comes to being the affinity to any one field. Sometimes it seems, and they very much follow the leader. So if crane number 1 wakes up in the morning and goes south, then good chance most of the other cranes in that group are going to go south that morning. So watch them a couple of times. If you have them in the field on consecutive feed cycles, like a morning and an evening or an evening and a morning, then feel free or feel more confident to go back in and set up in that area for them then.
Now, would you also say it's important to keep a diary if you've got cranes that are migrating in the second week of September and they're using a specific wetland to roost and stage? Are they likely to come back the next year?
Absolutely.
That's a key point, isn't it?
Absolutely. They are birds of habit, as we had mentioned, and they have very defined, let's call them flyways or corridors in the sky, right. And they stop at the same general water bodies every year. Cranes don't need a lot of water, unlike ducks and geese, where, on a dry year, for the most part, ducks and geese will be moving through areas that normally they would stop at that they don't. Well, if a crane, as long as he can get his feet in some mud in that area, he's probably going to maintain that same stop zone and keep going back and forth year after year.
So we talk about the age of the birds. Some of them can live 20 to 35 years. That's those adults leading all the rest of the flock to where they historically have had good staging, good feed, and to split up their migration. I think they fly and use up a lot of calories, and then they stage. And I think you put it the best when you said they get as fat as a seal.
Yeah, they do. They, it's like everything else. When they migrate, they need a lot of energy, and the fat is where that energy is stored for their migration.
Right.
One of the unique parts about cranes is, unlike a lot of the other waterfowl, they don't migrate in big, long jumps. 200 to 300 miles is a migration jump for a crane. So this is why they have a lot of stop spots along the way.
It's interesting you say that, because I had people phoning me this fall. They saw lots of them along the North Saskatchewan River all the way through the Eastern Parkland. And I think that the cranes really love the river valleys and the river bottoms. I know where you hunt them, they really key in on a lot of those alkali wetlands, the shallow, bigger wetlands where there's some emergent cover and stuff where they can get on the edges and blend right in.
Yeah, no doubt. There's those rivers have been migration corridors long before we even came onto the landscapes. It's without a doubt that those natural features they're still using, and they've been using it for as long as we know. Just
a really key point for hunters to remember is those rivers are important. And again, don't just drive around, shut your truck off or your car, get out and listen. Like, that was really good advice you gave, because I think when we were looking for them, I can't remember a time when we saw them before we heard them.
Yeah.
So
we one of the things that you're going to find with cranes is that in big fields, and especially in the rolling areas of the landscape, these guys have a tendency to get down into the low spots in the field, where you'll drive by a field and think there's hardly anything there, right, or no birds there. And you'll come up over a rise, and there'll be a low spot in the field, and you'll all of a sudden see hundreds of little red heads popping up and looking over the top of the field to just double at you. It's hard to believe that a bird that's about 4 feet high can hide in a flat grain field, but there's lots of little nicks and contours in the field, and they have a tendency to get down in those. I don't know if it's because they want to get out of the wind in that, or if it's just a way to maybe keep away from predators and things like that are on the landscape that run at them. But they don't have a tendency to stand on top of the hills, except when you get in big numbers and they're spread across the field. But if you have some dips and valleys in that field, like you say, stop and listen, because their voice gives them away from a long ways away.
And their eyes are so keen. I remember driving around looking for birds with you, and we come down a road and there would be some cranes on the top of a hill, but they're just like road runners. They just up and over the hill and disappear. Like, it's amazing how weary they are by nature and how they use the terrain to hide themselves.
Yeah, they have eyesight like a wild turkey.
Yeah.
Wild turkey or an eagle. Both of those birds have pretty good eyesight. And if you look at a crane's head, his eye is very huge as well. But definitely cautious by nature. Don't feel that just because you drove into a field or you drove over a road and the cranes jump and blow up, that the field's done. You're in trouble. Just carry on, move through, and just sit back and watch. For the most part, they won't go very far. They may just swirl right around, and there's maybe another 100 over the next little rise that you don't know about that they're going to drop in with as well. So just because you see birds jump, it's not like bumping a flock of geese out of a field, a big flock of geese, and they have a tendency to maybe not come back the next day. Cranes, not so much.
They're a different beast altogether. We've tried to provide as much information as possible on Harvest Your Own as a new hunting opportunity, so when you get an opportunity, check it out.
This podcast was made possible by Alberta Conservation Association and the Harvest Your Own community. If you're interested in harvesting your own food, There's a comprehensive collection of information. To gain insight and knowledge, head to the field, harvest your own protein, prepare it, and taste the results. HarvestYourOwn.ca is a library of information from getting started and geared up to processing, butchering, and cooking wild game to make the connection between health and food.
Well, I know when we were out this year, we actually shot some videos on how to clean and process cranes, and it was all fun. You know, they're the one thing I recall most when I cleaned it is that breastbone of theirs is like armor plating. Absolutely.
When I take my buddies out to hunt cranes, and the first thing I tell them is don't shoot them in the body. If you've ever everyone's cleaned a turkey at one point in time and seen how the breast is very low and forward and protects the vitals. Well, a crane's very similar to that. And what is very funny, and as you know, when the first time someone picks one up like your brother did, what looks huge and big and heavy is actually not. They're only about an 8 to 9 pound bird. It's all wings and legs.
Yeah, big hollow bones.
Big, thick breastbone, though. So when you get on they don't fly fast, folks. So those guys that are hunting them, just focus on that little red cap up front and get in front of it, and you'll have them down. By body shot cranes can be rough. And folks, if you do get one down and you're out there hunting them and it's wounded, get up and go. Because unlike a duck or a goose, these things are road runners. So you want to make sure you're moving fast and take a pocket full of shells with you.
Yeah, and it's that old adage of bird in hand. You knock one down, spend the time to go get it, even if others are coming in, because it will disappear on you.
Yeah, that's that. And the other factor we've learned is that unlike ducks and geese in the field, you can leave a duck and a goose laying down and you have more birds coming, a dead one laying there, and the decoys already usually doesn't have a negative effect. Cranes don't lay down in the field. They don't sleep in the field. They sleep standing up. So when there's a crane that's all laid up down in the field,
crumpled up,
quite often that will cause the other birds to squirt the decoys or pull out. So it is kind of very important to get them in the blind, not only for the retrieval process, but in order to ensure that you get another good opportunity.
Yeah, great advice. What type of gear? Like, you know, it's good advice to just focus on a headshot. And if you look at the head of a crane with the beak on it, the long beak, it's actually wider than a clay target. So if you lead off their forehead, you can get a much higher kill rate. But what kind of gear do you need? You need a full, like a 12 gauge?
Yeah, I've actually shot a limit this year with my 20 gauge.
I know you did. That's one of the reasons I bring it up.
It's not, no, you don't need a 12 gauge. It's the most common shotgun we all have, and it's absolutely all you need. I tell folks that come with me, we use 3-inch, good quality, either number 2s or BBs, 1s as well. I prefer BBs, but I have shot them with 2s because that's all I can shoot them with in a 20. Right. The difference, of course, if you're going with a smaller gauge, is just get them in tight. We don't pass shoot cranes. It can be very easily done, and you can do it in Alberta. It's one of probably the cheapest way to hunt cranes. As we mentioned, they are birds that have they do the same thing over and over. So those flight paths are pretty common, pretty well defined, and as I mentioned, they're not a high flyer. So you can get underneath them and actually harvest cranes without decoys or anything else. Just make sure if you're doing so, I'd recommend that you use good quality stuff as far as choke tubes and ammo.
You know, it's funny you bring that up because the seasons in Manitoba and Saskatchewan have been around for years, and I'd say the majority of locals, that's how they hunt them. They go out and shoot them a couple times a year, but they get on a flight path and pass shoot them coming off a roost or off a feeding area.
Yeah, my first, not my first experience, but one of my buddies' first experiences was hunting cranes in Saskatchewan, and their blind consisted of a sheet of plywood nailed to a telephone pole, because the birds would continually fly over these lines. Yep. So again, great sights. You can't just stand by the pole, because as soon as they see something move, it changes the flight path.
They don't miss a thing, do they?
No. As you've been aware, when we're in there, camouflage, keeping still, they're all very important. You have to do all your homework on a crane to be successful continually. I mean,
right, on a regular basis.
On a regular basis, you need to do your homework and you need to learn them. And you need to figure out that they're not geese and they're not ducks, they're cranes, and there's a little bit of idiosyncrasies in hunting them.
There is, and let's get into some of that too. Like you can use stand-up blinds, because I think those birds are naturally looking for edges. They're looking for some, you talked about their varied diet, but they're often on the edge of tall grass or on the edge of a field or a transition area. just because I guess their feed is varied. But you hunt stand-up blinds?
Yeah, we hunted in layouts initially. And when I was learning my way through the cranes, I always wanted to, that typical shoot him in the lips coming in, legs dangling in the layouts. It works, absolutely, but it's tough to hide from a crane.
It is.
In a layout. They're very, very cautious when they come into a group. The other thing, we'll talk about decoying them in a little bit, but the decoy setup. So we did find when we went to an actually well-camouflaged A-frame or any version of an A-frame stand-up blind that we had better success with them. And I do believe that absolutely part of it is that in that field and in Saskatchewan, there are no big blobs of grass sticking up in fields for the most part, unlike in Alberta, where I think they'd even look less off the landscape than they do in our area in Saskatchewan. But we've used them in Alberta as well. I think that's where the mice are going to hang out. That's where there's more insects and stuff like that. So I don't think it bothers them at all. Well, I'm quite sure it doesn't bother them at all, because I've literally felt the crane's wings going over the top of the blind on several occasions. So they're not scared of it.
And decoys?
Yeah. Initially, and I did most of my crane hunting over silo socks or silhouettes.
I did too, my initial ones.
And we shot lots of cranes with them. I have since went to some full bodies, and then I stepped up the game this year, and I actually did some stuffers of cranes. That's why you can shoot them with a 20 gauge and things like that, because we can get them in tight. But you don't need big numbers right off the bat. You can look at a typical crane field, and I'll use an example. We'll just say there's 100 cranes in a field. Unlike if you were looking at a flock of Canadas or snows or ducks, those 100 birds in webbed waterfowl are always jammed in all against shoulder to shoulder in the field for the most part. Cranes are spread out in their little pockets of 4s, 5s, and 8s throughout the field. So when you decoy them, be aware that they're probably not going to try to land in your decoys. They're going to try to land near your decoys. So I try to mimic that with putting just small pockets of little groups. We'll call them family groups for lack of a better term, but a family group would only be 3 in a crane. So they're usually like 6 or 8 in a group. But for a waterfowl, our family group is usually that size for goose hunt. So basically build what like an early season goose hunt where you only got 4 or 5 little family groups, and then just try and figure out their best avenue of approach. That's part of the scouting as well. Know where that roost is, so that you can minimize that crane having to change direction. Or cranes don't circle. Cranes don't. No. Generally, it's in or out. It's not. There's not a lot of circling and come back and things like that. You can get the odd young ones that you can get to fool that, but the adult crane is either coming to you or he's not. So if you can know where the roost is, you can kind of devise how your setup is better, so that that open hole, for lack of a better term, I'll call it a hole, but that spot you're hoping to have him drop in around your decoys is one where he doesn't have to fly over any decoys to get to you, and he doesn't have to change a lot of direction.
And the reason you do that is because as soon as they fly over the decoys, they look for the detail. So if you're running silhouettes and stuff, and we saw it, as soon as they get over the decoys, they're starting to and they turn out.
Yeah, absolutely. If you notice, when we were out, the only birds that landed in the decoys landed in the stuffers. And they didn't have to fly over any of the silhouettes or the socks to get to the stuffers from the location that we were hunting that day. But you're absolutely right. When they get over plastic, they get smart very quickly. So don't put your plastic out too far. Another thing that I did is I pulled, probably my furthest decoy out is about 15 to 18 yards out off the blind, so that when that crane puts it together, if he's coming in over the plastic vice the stuffers, it's too late.
Yeah, I was going to say that the one thing I learned from you is keep your hunting friends close and your crane decoys even closer.
Yeah. It's again, you're not really trying to get them to light in the decoys, and you're not trying to build like V's and all these things to funnel them in. These guys aren't trying to funnel into the decoys. They're trying to funnel into the area around the decoys. The further you put out the decoys, when they short stop you, because they're going to, even on the stuffers, they'll short stop you because they don't want to be with them. They just want to be close to them.
Yeah, it's a confidence thing. So what I think primarily, instead of trying to decoy the birds to land at your blind, you just want them to come over on a real low pass to go over the decoys and find their own little spot to land.
Precisely. You're trying to get them to come down. And again, they fly low enough that for the most part, if you can get them to come by the blind, they're going to be in range. So you're just giving them that confidence that, hey, this was, and in most cases, in my cases anyway, this is that little valley or depression or bowl in the field they were in last night. We're trying to get them come back into that bowl again in the morning.
And What would you say a wingspan of a crane is? It's over 2 meters.
Yeah, it's about 7 to 7.5 feet, depending on the crane. And we actually have 2 crane species here. We have the lesser and the greater in the mid-continent, mostly lessers.
Yes.
But and they're not a lot of size difference, about a pound. So when you pick one up in the field, you're not going to know if you got a lesser or a greater unless you get into leg measurement and beak measurement and those other things.
That's interesting, if you did want to look into it. But
yeah.
The reason I bring up the wingspan is a big attractant is flagging.
Yeah. We've discovered that we flag them quite a bit as well, but don't flag them like a goose. Geese come in and they flap, and we try to catch their attention. Grains glide into the decoys. So we use a very long double-poled flag, and we kind of just let it slide down, up and down very slowly to mimic that gliding into the decoys, because they only pump back at the very last second because their wings are so large, they don't have to backpedal a lot to stop, and they got lots of leg as a shock absorber too, on like a goose. So you don't see this big frantic backpedaling before they hit the ground. It's just kind of they're very, very smooth flyers.
They are, and when they do finish, it's a very smooth finish as well.
Yeah.
But keeping the decoys close and flagging with a long pole that make it look like there's something flying and drifting into your set. I can tell you from hunting with you that it works. We had birds going 500 yards west of us, and we'd flag them, and they would turn and just like on a dime be right on us.
Yeah, it's like geese and everything else. You got to remind them where they were yesterday. And as deer hunters and all waterfowl hunters say, when an animal stands still, you could drive by it or walk by it several times and you'll never see it. But when a deer flicks his tail or his ear or a goose flaps his wing in the field, suddenly you see them. When you're a great thing is when you're scouting for Canadas or specks, dark geese in a dark field, you'll drive by lots of times and you won't see anything till something jumps or moves. Well, it's the same for those cranes sitting there. They're going by. Your decoys aren't moving. They're not necessarily looking at you, and they're very, very noisy in themselves. So you can call all you want at a distance. That's not going to really make much difference. But if you can get them to visually look over at you, then the game changes.
They are very social, and they're so vocal that when they come out, they make so much racket that I don't think they could hear you at a distance if you're calling. Yeah.
If you can recall, I remember I said to you, they're just getting worked up now. We were actually probably, on the hunt we were at, we had 2 different roosts that were about probably 2 kilometers to the north and one to the west of us. And as the hunt was progressing, and actually we were pretty well done, and I said, they're just getting warmed up. What do you mean? I said, listen, and when they get on the roost and they get warmed up, it literally sounds like somebody's like a car driving down a gravel road.
A train taking off.
Yeah, like a train. That's actually, the train wreck.
Yeah, the old crane wreck. You do voice call them?
I do.
And it's important, like the adults are the croakers. They're the ones that put off that big, deep croaking sound that you hear, but the juveniles, actually, some people use a dog whistle. It's such a high-pitched whistle is the best way to describe it. And if you listen for it, you'll actually be able to distinguish the adults from the juveniles, and the juveniles tend to decoy a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. They do absolutely decoy better. And, they whistle. So we use a pintail whistle is what I use. I don't use dog whistle, but dog whistle, pintail whistle, just even your voice with a whistle, although it's not quite high-pitched enough usually, or it doesn't carry far enough. But, the juvies whistle, and the other one's it's like a rolling R. It's if you've heard it, you'll know exactly what a crane sounds like. If you haven't, I suggest for those guys that are thinking about hunting cranes and haven't before, just go on any of the Google sites and Google crane voice.
Exactly.
And listen, and you'll hear that's what you're trying to hear, and that's what you're trying to sound like. There are commercially produced crane calls. My personal opinion is you don't need to get the most expensive one there, because, again, they're so noisy anyway that I don't think they individually hear very well. It's just you're trying to give them a little more confidence. So, there are $200 acrylic crane calls. There's also $30 poly crane calls.
Yeah, and some people just roll their tongue into a spec call, or they voice call them, and it works very well.
That's the other thing you could use is a spec call. My son, who shoots lots of cranes, uses a spec call. I use my voice. He uses a spec call, and it works fine.
Any other advice for hunters thinking about cranes that haven't embraced it yet? They know about the opportunity, but where do you start? Any key words for them? Again,
find birds in your area, watch for them, listen for them. That's the number 1 and 2 things. If you don't find them, you can't hunt them. When you find them, pattern them. pattern them, learn what they do. Don't just rush right into it the first time you see a crane in a field. Get a little bit of time to observe them, and you'll be able to be much more successful with it. I've been chasing them for the better part of 6 years now, and almost every day they teach me something else. Sometimes I want to get taught something, and I'll try something that's outside the box, and sometimes it works, and it becomes the next thing in the tool chest, and sometimes it doesn't. You go, okay, that won't work on a crane. But watch them, observe them. You don't need a lot of gear. Like I mentioned, you can pass shoot them to start with. But a couple of dozen silhouette decoys or socks and a good blind. That blind could be in the hedge. That could be a layout blind. You don't have to have a commercially built A-frame to hunt them. It's just one of the ways it eases it up. But there's all kinds of things you can use for a blind to stay hidden.
Just stay hidden. That's
just
the
stay
key.
hidden and
Don't move.
Don't move. And if you're not in a layout type, if you're not in a stand-up type blind, then don't be in the decoys. Get away from the even in a layout. Get away from the decoys a little bit, because remember they're looking through it very, very specifically, and you're not hiding like you're in a goose setup with hundreds of decoys around you. There's only a few, so get side shoot them, folks. Even in a layout, try and side shoot them. You just have a better opportunity and better success.
Well, that's all very good advice. I hope more people get out and embrace the crane hunt next year. We did shoot a bunch of videos when we were in the field this year, everything from setting up decoys to calling, identifying birds, talking about leading, cleaning, showing the breastplates, all the rest of it. So we hope to have that up on Harvest Your Own before the season opens next year. And I just want to thank you again, Mark, for coming in and sharing your knowledge. I mean, that's some hunting fraternities are very secretive about how they do things and where their success comes from, but the waterfowl community is a lot friendlier, I find. Well, and your knowledge is going to help everybody.
Yeah, it's just number one thing is get out there and enjoy it. Enjoy the new challenge, because they are a new challenge for Alberta hunters, and for the most part, they're a new challenge for a lot of waterfowl hunters. So get out, enjoy it. There's nothing like watching the sun come up and hear the crane roost wake up at the same time, and hope that you're on the X again.
Exactly.
And when you're on the X, it'll provide a hunt opportunity that you'll never forget.
Yeah, I can still vividly remember all the details.
So, number one thing, folks, get out there, have some fun with it, enjoy that new opportunity, and don't get frustrated on it all, because hey, a good day hunting's better than any other day at work.
That's right. Thanks again for coming in, Mark. We greatly appreciate it.
Don't worry, Brad. Thanks for coming, and I had a great time when we hunted together.
We hope to inspire people to reconnect with nature and appreciate where your food comes from by harvesting your own. For more information on getting started or to learn specifics about the Field to Fork experience, visit harvestyourown.ca and follow on Facebook and Instagram. Check back often for new material, recipes, and videos that are posted regularly. Please subscribe to Harvest Your Own podcast and take the time to rate and review the show to help us build a dedicated core of passionate hunters as our regular audience. Until next time, embrace the outdoors and all it has to offer. Thanks for joining us.